All right, welcome back to Birds of a Feather Talk Together podcast. This is RJ, and as always, I'm with John, Shannon, and Amanda. So we're getting together today. This is going to be a little less traditional than our normal episodes. There was like a significant event in the past couple days in Chicago that we wanted to touch on. And John and Shannon, I believe, is it safe to say, was on like the front lines for all of this?
Yeah, the museum has been monitoring migration through the Chicago area every spring and fall for over 40 years, which predates us. And yesterday was an event that our colleagues that have been here a long time said day before yesterday, right? Thursday.
Yesterday.
It was Thursday. God, it's been so crazy. So yeah, so Thursday morning was a day that unlike almost any other that they'd ever experienced in terms of migration, meaning that we got up in the morning and I went out on our porch in Evanston and I was just watching small birds just stream over the house from the north going south. And Dave Willard, who monitors McCormick Place every spring and fall morning when he's in town, and others do it when he's not, was down at McCormick Place, and there were hundreds of birds hitting the windows there. And so it was a major window collision event, and the biggest one at McCormick Place that they'd ever seen. And McCormick Place, for anybody who doesn't know, is about a 4-story building, but it's one of the largest meeting spaces in the world, and it's right along the lakefront south of the museum. And it's
a big black glass building.
Yep. So. And we've learned a lot over the years in the sense that one of the things that really draws the birds in are having the lights on and the curtains open. And the curtains were open, and there was a show going in because that's what McCormick Place does. And this turned out to be a very big movement of birds, and an awful lot of them hit the windows.
And so the number was in the thousands, is that right?
It was about 960 birds.
Oh my gosh.
That were picked up there.
A lot of different species. The commonest things were palm warblers and yellow-rumped warblers. There were well over 100 of each.
Wow.
And then there was a tail of other species. I think there were 19 species of warblers, and it just was we wanted to mention that there are these places to go to look for information like this. There's the Cornell Lab of Ornithology runs something called Birdcast, which will actually use radar data to predict how things are moving around on any given night in spring and fall. And they were predicting a moderately strong movement of birds through Chicago. And, we were talking about this before we came on, and some of the bird watchers, including one of our graduate students, Jacob Drucker, and his wife, and another one of our grad students, Marky Muchler, were out at Promontory Point down by Jackson Park and had over 130,000 birds go over.
Oh my gosh.
And so, it may be that well over 1 million birds passed through Chicago last night. And unfortunately, a number of them hit windows, and we're still figuring out the total numbers.
Wow.
So because we've been doing this for so long, the birds that die against windows have been coming to the museum for so long, we know some things for sure with data, not just that we think, but that we know. And we know that closing the blinds or curtains and closing the lights off around buildings reduces window collisions by half or even more in some buildings. So that the city of Chicago has proactively decided to turn off the lights of most of the buildings in spring and fall migration. And you can see from the birds that get picked up and come to the museum that actually works. And it was Mayor Daley who started that. He loved birds, and he just basically worked with the park district and all the building managers to have the lights turn off. And if you're here in Chicago at night, you know that there are a lot of buildings with lights on them. That kind of skyline is iconically recognizable. But at this time of year, it's a lot darker than it will be once migration is over. There's been a lot of research that's been done on how to stop this from happening, not just the light regimes, which obviously make a big difference. There's a lot of light pollution in urban areas that cause some of these problems. But there's been developments of glass that is more tuned to cluing birds into the fact that there's a piece of glass there and not to hit it, because the birds just see a reflection. You know, those infinity mirrors that you can go into at Halloween where you just you can't figure out where you are and it looks like the world goes on forever in the same way. Well, that's what birds see when they're flying. They just see the reflection. It looks like the tree that's over there is a tree in the behind them. The lake is, keeps going. Mm-hmm. And they don't have a sense of glass. Just like a toddler will walk right through a screen door or into a glass door because they don't have experience with that, and the birds don't either. And so there are things you can do to glass to make them less attractive to birds so that you disrupt that plane of view for a bird, and that triggers the bird into knowing there's something in front of it. So a lot of glass these days is etched, and they've done studies to look at where the etchings should be, how many inches apart, for example, the etching should be. So I was reading about it this morning, a 2x4 rule, that if you're going in a horizon way, it's every 2 inches have some etch. And you can etch with lots of things. Hydrochloric acid, you can physically etch. And then 4 inches in the other direction. And birds won't, that's kind of the space that they won't fly through in their normal life without windows. And so if you trigger them into thinking that that space is just that small, that's enough for them to avoid the glass. Of course, it costs a lot more money to put in glass like this. But, if birds are a priority in that sense, pressure has to be placed on business owners and the government to prioritize this, because I don't blame them necessarily, but businesses aren't going to do it on their own on average because it costs money. So,
and are there buildings in Chicago that the owners are taking efforts to put these in?
There are some. I think, it's retrofitting, as Shannon said, is expensive. And I think one of the big things is, we'd like to see some ordinances potentially that make future buildings safer by virtue of how they start as opposed to trying to do it retrofitting wise.
Do you think this event will be an eye-opener that could kind of make people aware of what's going on and try to start to implement things?
I do. I think people are, thinking about these things a lot more. And so you want to let people know as a result. And so that's one of the things that I think the publicity has been trying to get across. I mean, I keep thinking about this from this special aspect of what migration is, and fall migration, coming back to Shannon mentioning, birds not being able to experience glass, is a lot of these warblers bred up in southern Canada, and a good proportion of the birds coming through are actually juvenile birds who have never seen a city before, much less seen glass. And so, every fall you're dealing with a bunch of naive birds that are just trying to do what evolution has evolved to control their mindset to do, which is get south to their wintering grounds.
And I think it is really shocking, right? When you look at those pictures and you see all those birds laid out on the table inside of the Field Museum, that tugs on people's heartstrings.
Sure.
Yeah. But I wish what tugged on their heartstrings, maybe even more than this, is keeping their cats indoors, for example. Outdoor cats kill between 1.5 and 3 billion birds a year in the United States alone.
Oh my gosh.
And the statistics on window kills of birds is like 1 million across the world a year. So,
hey, just wanted to take a quick break as there was some confusion, and one of our listeners caught it and thankfully pointed it out to us. Shannon emailed me to clarify and said the numbers for collision deaths are 300 million to 1 billion nationwide. Thanks to that person for catching this. Okay, now back to the show.
The scale of death is much greater from outdoor cats, and so that needs to get as much attention. Cats are not native species in our environments. They should be inside people's homes. You can take them out on a leash, which sounds funny, but we know plenty of people who do that.
I've seen it.
Take their cats for a walk. But cats are horrible killers of birds, not just birds, but other small wildlife. And a bell does not solve it, and cats don't solve rat problems on average. So we need to keep our cats inside. They have healthier lives too.
Yeah.
But I know it is shocking. But the one thing is that these birds they're data. So they die by the museum, they come into the museum, and they're going to be part of scientific studies now that can only be done in our museum with all of the comparative material. So what is it about these birds? As John was saying, what's the ratio of juveniles to adults that are going through? How big are these birds? We know that birds are getting smaller over the last 40 years. These window kill data show us that pretty dramatically. So what's the size range of the birds that hit these buildings? And then what can we learn about how we're going to stop this from happening as we make weather events more common and more severe? They're going to impinge on migratory times more frequently, and that's going to result in more deaths, which means we have to attack this problem in a lot of different ways, including altering the environment so much, stop raising the temperature of the earth so much.
So I'm curious what the collection process is like. Over 900 birds seems like astronomical.
Yeah, it is. We need 50 people to come and help.
Is it that many?
Dave Willard, our retired collection manager, deserves the real credit for continuing to do this year after year after year. And it's just, he's always seen the value in it from a scientific standpoint. And we're starting to see a lot of neat publications come out of it, as Shannon was saying, of all different kinds. And so, I think one of the things that the longitudinal aspect of having this much information is going to be really valuable in ways that we haven't even thought of yet.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, regarding following up on RJ's question, were people posted at McCormick Place like knowing this would happen?
No.
No, okay.
No, and I think this is the interesting thing about this. We were talking about this in the museum today. Is that at some level we've got better data about weather than ever before. So this Birdcast website that I mentioned that Cornell runs, and one of the thoughts I was having was, well, let's see if we can get to the point where the day before we're anticipating what's going on, and we're almost there. And the question is, are we? If you have a whole bunch of false alarms, people are going to get frustrated. That's true.
But the use of artificial intelligence to monitor these trends is only going to get better. So you have to train your data on something, and then it keeps learning and learning and learning. And there are some really great people who are doing very high-end things with both imaging. You can see these birds on radar. Wow. You can see it. You can see the migration. And when that happened 20 years ago, when we picked up birds that fell into the lake, people tried to publish a paper on it. People are like, you can't see birds on radar. It's crazy. But you totally can. And the technology is only getting better to train the artificial intelligence so that we can not just mop up afterward, but, do a better job of predicting these events, which could mean that you really go to these building people and say, look, this is going to be a bad day. Please shut your blinds, make sure the lights are turned off. And that should help. But
yeah.
So what can listeners do, people that are fans, to try to help? Is it writing politicians? Is it going to owners of buildings? Is it protecting your own home as well?
We don't want to demonize buildings or building owners. We know a lot about McCormick Place because it's right south of the museum, and you can walk there and walk around it. And the people have been very generous in not freaking out when we do walk around the building. So you don't never want to demonize McCormick Place or the managers of these buildings, because everybody needs to work together to make sure the light regimes are better suited to not killing birds. And so that's going to be a sacrifice for some people. You don't get to see, I don't remember what this building's called, but I always call it the wedding cake building.
Oh, yes.
Downtown. Well, at some times of the year, you're not going to see the lights of that beautiful building. And, get over it. And always lobbying your politicians for climate change solutions, energy solutions, all of these things, building codes so that bird-friendly glass is actually required in certain kinds of buildings. Proper bird-friendly glass installed properly.
Yeah.
People have tried. They've put the windows in backward. And the other thing the studies show is that you need the etching to be on the side facing the outside for birds. It's not as effective if the etching is through the glass on the inside. And so if building people are fairly naive to what to do with this glass, they pay a lot of money for this glass and then install it backward, it's going to be less effective. A lot of glass that is mirrored kind of is super bad for birds too, because that's like a mirror.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that those things can be really important for energy conservation, but then you have a special obligation if you're going to use glass that's really highly reflective like that to do something to help birds. Mm-hmm. So if you find dead birds, you can, if they're alive, you can call the rehab centers and they'll come and get the bird.
The Chicago collision monitors have a online number and they'll come out and pick up live birds, which is a terrific service for the city of Chicago.
And if you find dead birds, you can you should probably wear gloves, although we don't. You can put them in a Ziploc bag, put a note in the bag that says who you are, where where the bird was found, what day it is, any other special circumstances, put it in the bag and put it in the freezer, and then bring it to the museum. And we'll take its data and document it and make sure it's part of the scientific endeavors of the museum. And then really honestly lobby for environmental protections and for clean energy, because in the long run, even though those aren't shocking, those things you're not going to see all those birds. I mean, who knows how many birds got burned to death in the fires. I'm from British Columbia. The entire province was on fire for most of the summertime, and a lot of birds probably died, but they don't die in a place where people can see them. And so this is big and loud, but we don't know that this event plays much of a role in the numerical declines, the population declines of North American birds. This we don't know. So, we can ask questions. We were just talking with Jacob Drucker again about this morning. You can ask questions about whether that are the days like this becoming more common? Are they killing more birds? Does it one day like this signify a whole migratory season that might be more deadly for birds than others?
Well, hopefully just awareness helps, people understand that things are happening, whether or not they're super significant, but people just start to see that we're affecting the population and the things that we're doing is limiting what birds are able to do and, contributing to the decline. Mm-hmm. I feel like, years ago, people might not have even known that, the average person, and now they're talking about it on the news. So hopefully that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. If you have time, come and volunteer in the museum. You can be part of turning those birds into scientific study specimens. So.
And the Chicago collision monitors who go around the buildings downtown have over 100 volunteers now that do these routes in the spring and fall.
Wow. So it's a good way to meet people who might think of things that are important the way you do. So, there's lots of ways to get involved.
Great. Well, I think we're about it on time. So I hope people that are listening can spread the word about what happened and volunteer as well. Is there anything anybody wants to add before we call it on this one?
Just to, again, the last thing I'd say is this happened because Chicago is an incredible crossroads for bird movement every spring and fall. And so we need to do our part, and we can.
And it happens in the light because the Field Museum's made a commitment to monitoring the fates of migratory birds for decades at this point. So we have data, and that makes a big difference. It's not just emotional appeals, which are obviously make sense, but we actually can apply data and make better solutions from data.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thanks, all.